Hello, welcome to session 2B at the ASYFAIR conference. I'm very excited about the turnout again. A lot of people interested in the topic. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this panel on religious conversion asylum cases. We have 3 fantastic presentations on the issue, and I keep my introduction fairly brief. So the speakers in this panel will discuss a variety of issues concerning religious conversion, ranging from the problematic assessment of genuineness and credibility of religious conversion, the examination of authenticity of an asylum seeker's religious identity, narratives of religious conversion among refugees, witness statements and intersectional factors, and many more. The speakers will take us on a journey through the experiences of converted asylum seekers in Europe and address the overarching division between churches and nation states in refugee status determination and refugee protection. I'm certain that you will find the following presentations as interesting as I will, and I look forward to the Q&A at the end of the session. So without much further ado, I would like to introduce you to the first speaker in our panel. Lena Rose holds a DPhil in Social and Cultural Anthropology from the University of Oxford and is a Leverhulme Trust Early Career Fellow at the Centre for Socio-Legal Studies at the University of Oxford. Her ongoing 3-year interdisciplinary project with the title Christianity on Trial, Asylum Conversion and the Modern Nation State examines the negotiation of Christianity through the lens of asylum adjudication of claimants based on the fear of religious persecution following a conversion to Christianity in Germany and the UK. Lena Rose, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just going to share my presentation. So first of all, thank you for this amazing conference and especially for a panel on religious conversion, which is really exciting. So asylum claims based on conversion to Christianity due to fear of religious persecution in the country of origin are actually surprisingly frequent in many European countries and are brought especially by Iranian and Afghan asylum seekers. In fact, in Germany, which is where my research is based, most asylum cases that have been brought by Iranians in the last couple of years are based on conversion to Christianity, either surplus, so in Germany itself, in Iran, or on the asylum seekers' journeys. Now, the statistics on specific asylum grounds are not really available, but anecdotally, from various sources, about 90% of Iranian applications for asylum are based on conversion to Christianity. And the background to this is that apostasy or falling away from Islam is a major crime in the Islamic Republic of Iran and Afghanistan, and can lead to a death sentence. So it presents a valid reason for seeking protection elsewhere under the Refugee Convention. And despite being a frequent ground for asylum, only about 20% of such claims were successful after the first hearing in 2019, which is the latest data I have. And a bit less than 20% of these negative decisions were then overturned by an administrative court, also in 2019. And this is a number that applies to all Iranians, but because most Iranians base their claims on conversion, it's kind of a rough estimate. The focus of the assessment of asylum claims based on religious conversion, including conversion to Christianity, is to determine what risks an applicant would face on the basis of their faith if they were to be sent back to their country of origin. And to assess this, decision makers first need to be convinced that the applicant's conversion is indeed genuine. In essence, this means that decision makers of a secular state need to determine what counts as a credible conversion to Christianity. So what beliefs a genuine convert would need to hold and what practices are essential for a true Christian. Case law is very clear that decision makers should not conduct a kind of faith test per se, but determining the depth of a religious identity, as is the current practice, is effectively quite similar, actually. And as you can imagine, this is very difficult and it can lead to faulty decisions. So in this paper, I would like to focus especially on the interplay between churches that accompany converts through their asylum processes and the state as represented by administrative judges in determining who counts as a Christian. So I will first explain my data collection before briefly outlining the asylum process in Germany. And I will then work through a specific example that highlights some of these tensions between church and state in asylum processes based on conversion. And I argue very briefly at the end that the expert witness of pastors should play a greater role in determining the credibility of a converted asylum seeker. So I'm currently conducting a 3-year research project, which I'm in the 2nd year of, and funded by the Leverhulme Trust, which focuses on asylum processes based on conversion to Christianity. I've conducted fieldwork in 2 different areas in Germany, so in the northeast and in a more religiously oriented south, for which I observed 32 asylum appeal cases at a total of 5 administrative courts, plus about 20 asylum appeal cases based on other reasons, and conducted 38 formal interviews with everyone who's involved in these processes, so lawyers, judges, asylum seeker converts, translators, pastors, and representative of religious organizations, plus, of course, many informal conversations in the context of these asylum appeal hearings, which can often take many, many hours. I also conducted a systematic analysis of publicly available asylum appeal decisions based on religious conversion, and conducted participant observation at a number of church services and theological workshops. Unfortunately, the ethnographic research element, so I'm an anthropologist by background, the ethnographic research element in the churches themselves was a bit curtailed due to the pandemic, because just when I started, a lot of the services basically were shut down. And I want to emphasize that I'm still in the process of analyzing the data, so I want to use this time to give a first foray into these tensions that exist between church and state in these kinds of cases, and I really look forward to your comments and questions to further develop this analysis. Now, before I move on, I just want to briefly summarize what happens when you seek asylum in Germany. After an asylum seeker registers in Germany, at some point, they are invited to an official asylum interview where they can then present their case. A decision maker at the Federal Office of Migration and Refugees will then decide the case and communicate the decision to the asylum seeker. If the asylum decision is negative, the asylum seeker can lodge an appeal at an administrative court, and the court hearing often takes place several months or even years after the submission of the appeal, during which time, in my case here, the converted asylum seeker normally continues to attend their church and other religious groups and often deepens their commitment. At the court hearing itself, it's usually a single judge who assesses the initial decision and conducts a further interview with the asylum seeker. And they can then affirm the initial decision or order the federal office to grant protection to the asylum seeker in some form. Now, to exemplify the tension between church and state in asylum processes based on conversion to Christianity, I thought I'd give you an example that stirred up the churches I was working with in southern Germany earlier this year. It concerns the rejection of an Iranian man in his late 30s who had been part of the German church he was at for 6 years and actually served on the church council. Any German person in this role would be considered a firm and committed Christian. And I use this example as someone who's especially committed to show just how high the hurdles are in these kinds of processes. Unlike some of the news stories that circulated about churches that baptize asylum seekers en masse and without much preparation, this particular church was actually very hesitant in their approach. They started a cafe for asylum seekers when many asylum seekers arrived in this part of the city in 2015 and 16, but it wasn't really focused on Christian content at all. It was more a place to offer advice and practical assistance or to practice German and a chance to charge the devices of some of the visitors in the plug points in the church. And while the church does have a few Iranian members now, in fact, they never had enough converts at any one point to offer a Bible, kind of a group Bible course, which a lot of other churches do offer. The man in question, which I'm just gonna call Reza for anonymity, became interested in Christianity and was instructed in private conversations over a whole year. And he was baptized a good 1.5 years after his first expression of interest. Reza is very involved in different aspects of the church, including the choir. He serves as a sacristan, which is someone who practically helps to run the services. He visits church members who are sick and takes them to church in their wheelchair. And he was, as I said, appointed to the church council. Once he was baptized, he instructed others in the Christian faith. He became good friends with the pastor and other church members, and the pastor described him as someone who's right at the center of things. When his asylum claim on the basis of his conversion was rejected in March 2017, the church found a lawyer for him to lodge an appeal. His court hearing was almost 4 years later, which is not uncommon, this year in January 2021, during which time during the time of waiting, he got even more involved in the church. In preparation for the hearing, the hands-on pastor had acquired a list of questions often asked at these hearings and had worked through these with Reza to give him the best shot at this hearing. She also provided a letter of support for him, and she accompanied him to the court hearing. And now I should say that I didn't attend the hearing myself, but I conducted an in-depth interview with the pastor about it, and who also read the decision, and I attended similar hearings with the same judge in the same court. As in other asylum processes, the most important element in establishing the credibility of a claimant to base their claim on conversion and their need for protection lies in the asylum seeker's narrative, which needs to have certain qualities. So they need to be coherent, chronological, told with sufficient detail, without contradictions, and it has to be spontaneous. And whether they can deliver this kind of narrative, of course, depends on their personality, on their education, knowledge of the court setting, their level of nervousness, the quality of translation, as we've heard in the previous presentations, memory, and also their preparation through their lawyers or the church. And a lot of the above depends on what judges call an overall impression. Judges claim that they have to, and I quote one of the judges I worked with, they have to look into the hearts of the converts. And as the work of ASYFAIR, and I'm sure many others who attend this conference has shown, the impression judges have of appellants can also depend on things like the mood of the judge, the time of day or the week, and other external factors. On the other hand, as Danstrom and White have shown, and I quote, the right kind of performance, the embodiment of the narrative can in some cases overrule a narrative that was previously in the procedure considered not credible, when it affirms the self-experience of the incidents expressed. And already on this basis, Reza was at a disadvantage, given that he is a quiet man and not a storyteller. He would never get up in church and preach from the front, the pastor said. Narratives also need to be plausible. And here, what is considered plausible depends on what the judges know about Christian conversions of Iranians. And importantly, and this is unlike in other asylum cases based on conversion to other religions, it seems that often judges rely on their cultural knowledge of Christianity. I conducted a systematic analysis of positive decisions to find out the criteria that prove a genuine conversion that is accepted. And these are some of the aspects. So asylum seekers need to be baptized. They need to have a pre-existing interest in religion. They need to know the basics of the Christian faith, whatever this means, but often it includes biblical knowledge and knowledge about things like Christian festivals or prayers or the creed. They also need to relate this knowledge to themselves. So they, for example, need to explain a favorite Bible passage and what it means to them and how it changes their life. They have to point to specific events that triggered their conversion, like crisis moments. They need to show a rational and intellectual engagement with different faiths, and also their carefully considered decision to convert to Christianity specifically out of this array of other faiths. And they need to show that they evangelize. Ideally, they need to have shared their faith with their family in Iran to prove their commitment. And some of these points are also reflected in the available guidance documents that some of the judges draw on. There were two parts to Reza's hearing, which is common. So the first part focused on his flight story, and the second part on his Christian convictions. And I will just focus on the second part here, and specifically on 3 common questions and answers that show the difficulty with these kinds of hearings. The first question, the judge asked, "Why are you in this specific church?" And Reza replied, "Because they welcomed me." And this answer was not specific enough to help the judge establish a genuine conversion. Judges often expect that asylum seekers find a church that, I quote, suits their character and personality, and perhaps even specific theology in their choice of denomination. But the reality is that most Iranians or Afghans who are interested in Christianity are either invited by other asylum seekers who already attend the church, or they find a church that actually looks like a typical church, so it has a steeple. And these are usually mainline churches, so Protestant or Catholic. And at this early stage of conversion, converts don't usually know about the denominational differences between Protestant, Baptist, Free churches, and so on. And the lack of a more detailed reply here is signaled to the judge that the belonging to this church of Reza is based on social rather than internal reasons. The second question, the judge asked, "What does it mean for you to be a Christian?" And Reza replied, "Because I want to serve Christ and the people." This answer was interpreted as too vague and, importantly, as not specific for Christianity. In other hearings I attended, I have heard judges ask provocatively when people say an answer like this, "Are you trying to say that Christians are the only people who help others?" But in this case, I know that the pastor herself had taught Reza that Christianity means to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And he literally repeated this in the hearing. The third question. Following the pastor's letter, which emphasized Reza's consistency and perseverance as a member of the church, the judge asked, "It looks like you're doing a lot in church." And Reza replied, "It's nothing to speak of." For the judge, this meant that she doesn't have enough details to share. Or maybe she did know that he has details, but she can't really work with anything that he doesn't say. But after the hearing, Reza explained to the exasperated pastor that he was thinking of the verse that says, "Let not your left hand know what your right hand does," which is in Matthew 6 in the Bible. And he said that he didn't want to brag about his activities and in this way show his Christianity. The judge also found some inconsistencies in Reza's flight narrative, which I'm not talking about now, but the decision that he was then sent later specifically said that she did not believe that he was a genuine Christian. She recognized that Reza belonged to the church for 6 years and that Christian values are important to him, but she assumed that he just wanted to belong somewhere. And if he had found a different non-Christian group, he would have joined that one and felt a sense of belonging there. The decision says that for a new asylum application based on conversion, he'd need to name a special event to prove his conversion, and his faith would need to take on a deeper nature or a deeper quality, as it sometimes says in the decisions. What is so problematic about this hearing, and this is just one example of many, is that this particular church had a very strong focus on helping people as expression of Christ's love for humankind. And Reza specifically did so out of a visible Christian motivation. According to this church's interpretation of Christianity, Reza is in fact an ideal Christian, and exactly what they would like to see from all their members, as the pastor said. And yet the judge did not accept the way Reza practiced and expressed his Christianity as genuine, claiming to know Reza's religious identity better than the pastor who accompanied him for over 6 years. Having said this, the judge has case law on her side. Only in April this year, the German Federal Constitutional Court decided on a conversion case and affirmed an unsuccessful appeal to the Federal Administrative Court. So the decision states explicitly, and I put the quote here, that state agencies and administrative courts are not bound to the assessment of an office holder of a Christian church regarding a genuine and lasting conversion when they assess the conditions for refugee status. Which basically means the courts do not need to listen to pastors regarding an appellant's conversion. And the decision continues to say that they can't question the fact that a convert belongs to a church as such, but they can check whether Christian practices that might lead to persecution in their country of origin are really part of the identity of the claimant or not. Then in the context of the role of expert witnesses, and I consider pastors and congregation members as such, I would like to throw some doubt on the appropriateness of the authority that administrative courts and even the state migration agencies give themselves in deciding whether a conversion is genuine or not. To my knowledge, there isn't so much, there isn't any academic literature yet on pastors as expert witnesses, but I'm very happy for you to correct me on this, or if you have other suggestions on the role of support groups as expert witnesses in other asylum grounds that might shed some light on this issue. The current legal practice seems to stem from a suspicion that pastors baptize converts, even though these have not internalized their Christian faith, and therefore the convert's religious identity needs to be assessed by the judges again. Judges have also mentioned to me that they assume churches want to increase their membership or baptize asylum seekers in order to help them. And those cases definitely do exist. But even so, I would suggest that this reasoning harbors particular uninterrogated assumptions about what conversion and Christianity are, which are far too narrow to reflect the diversity of Christian experiences. By and large, my experience is that most churches take time over instructing asylum seekers in the Christian faith, and many actually turn down those who very obviously seek baptism to further their asylum process. Churches know that they have a reputation to lose, and most churches are far less concerned about the numbers of members than often assumed. Church denominations and representatives have reached out to the migration agency and court representatives to try and engage on this issue, and there has been some dialogue, both regionally and nationally in Germany. At this point, however, the issue has developed into a bit of a power struggle between church and state. And yet almost every judge I spoke to in the context of the hearings I observed confessed that they find conversion cases particularly hard to decide. One judge even said, "I am not a theologian, how can I possibly decide this?" And another one said that they are often left unsure about the genuineness of a convert's faith, even after sifting through support letters and after the hour-long hearings, in which case she errs on the side of caution and rejects the claim. And she even said, literally, you can always find something you can always find a contradiction in their narrative, in their flight narrative, on which then you can base the rejection. So it seems to me that the obvious solution to the difficulty with deciding conversion cases is to accept to a greater degree the expert witness of pastors, who know the claimant much better, often for years, and can provide details regarding their faith lives and religious identity, much more than might become apparent in a hearing with all the issues that are normally also apparent or also part of the hearings that we've heard about before. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that fascinating talk, Lena. I already have a few questions lined up, but I will wait for the Q&A. So next in our program, we have Ilona, who is a doctoral student in systematic theology at Abo Academy University in Finland. Her research combines systematic theology with forced migration studies. In her doctoral dissertation, she examines conversion to Christianity, concentrating on people who come to Finland from majority Muslim countries as asylum seekers and who converted during their asylum procedure. In her thesis, Ilona looks at how the state authorities assess credibility of conversion during the asylum process. Her research approach is qualitative with a special interest in theology and ethical questions. Ilona, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Ilona Silva. I'm talking to you from Finland. And yes, I'm a PhD student in systematic theology, as you just heard. And my research is about religious conversion, and it's great to speak here after Lena, because it's I think a lot of our things are quite interrelated, and the same themes are coming again. So my research concentrates on Finland and the current situation in which my research takes place. Now I have to move you a bit so you're not, your pictures are not on my way. Great. Is that over 1,000 asylum applications have been made based on conversion to Christianity between 2016 and 19. Unfortunately, these are the latest numbers that I have found. And many of these people are asylum seekers who came 2015. And often conversion is aground in the appeal stage or in the subsequent application phase when the asylum process has gone until the end already one time, and the person makes a new application. And as we already heard, for converts, the especially important stage of the asylum process is the credibility assessment, or rather maybe authenticity assessment. Now, normally I feel I have to explain this a lot, what it means, but now we have such a knowledgeable crowd here, so maybe I don't have to explain so much. Just saying quickly that instead of concentrating on credibility of an event, the asylum officials are interested in authenticity of the religious identity. And my research question is, how does the Finnish Immigration Service, which often is called Migri, how does Migri understand religion? And I ask this because the background to this question is that there is not any, at least public, guidelines for how the credibility assessment of religious conversion should be made inside Migri. So they are not very open about how they're doing this, but I am trying to figure it out based on my material, which consists of 48 asylum decisions, of which 20 are negative and 28 are positive, made between 2017 and 19. And the positive decisions, unfortunately, are not so useful for the analysis because they are normally not explained or justified. There is often only a short statement about that the conversion has taken place and the person is fearing persecution and that the fear is well-founded. So unfortunately, comparative analysis is not possible, and I has been forced to concentrate on only the negative ones. And in Finland, 2015, many of the asylum seekers who came were Iraqi, and also many of the converts are from Iraq. And in my material, of the 20 negative decisions, 10 are of Iraqi, 5 of Afghani, 4 of Iranian, and 1 of Somali nationals. And they have obviously converted to Christianity after leaving the home country, and they have sought asylum in Finland. And my method is what I call theological analysis, which means that I concentrate on 2 key theological themes in the asylum decisions, which are faith and church. And I pay special attention to how these appear in the asylum decisions. So first, faith. Traditionally in theology, it has been divided, the concept of faith has been divided into 2 categories or 2 aspects. First of which is the so-called content of faith, the beliefs. This also Lena mentioned, it is the knowledge, the doctrines of Christianity, for example, the Apostles' Creed, or also Christian ethics can be included here. And the second part is the so-called act of faith, which is if we think that the content of faith is somehow outside of me as a person, the act of faith is inside me. And it is my act of believing and trusting and knowing God and his revelation, as Pannenberg says. And it affects also one's relationship with other people. And in the asylum decision documents, there are often references to asylum seekers' knowledge of the Christian doctrines. And these I have identified as references to the content of faith. And these kind of references can be found in 16 out of 20 of my negative decisions. and references to the asylum seeker's feelings and thoughts about Christianity, and references to how the person's life has changed can be found in 13 out of 20 of the negative decisions. And these I identify as references to the act of faith. And let's take an example of one asylum decision and look how faith is understood in them. And we will start with a quote concerning the beliefs, the content of faith. And it reads as follows. You have told that God has died for you and he is present and helps you. You're told that the most important thing in the Bible is the 10 commandments and following them. The most important thing for you is to follow Jesus Christ and obey his teaching and commandments. You're told that there is nothing in the Bible that you could not understand because there is only God's word and it is understandable. So you here is the asylum seeker as the migration office is directing its words to the asylum seeker. And this is how Migri comments this part. You have been able to tell detailed enough of the doctrines and holidays of Christianity. Migri accepts as a fact that you have participated in teaching of Christianity, in other activities of the parish, and that you have been baptized. So in the quote, there are many, I would say, very central Christian doctrines of God's loving presence in one's daily life, Jesus as a true human and a true God, the 10 commandments, the Bible as the word of God. And Migri acknowledges this, but only to a limited extent, because they only say that this tells that you have been participating in teaching of Christianity and that you have been baptized. So it does not, this statement does not strengthen the authenticity of this person's Christian identity. Let's look next what is said about the act of faith in the decision. So Migri writes, you're told that you had read the Gospels and noticed that there were beautiful words of love and peace. You're told that Jesus Christ talks only about love and there is nothing like this in other religions. You're also told that there is nothing else than killing in Islam. You're told that you continued reading and then you felt that something was happening inside you. You're told that your life has changed after you converted to Christianity, because before you were full of sin, but now you are a disciple of the Lord and he erased your sins. Sorry, now your pictures are again on my way. How can I move you? You're told that you could not describe your feelings with words because now you know where you are going after you die. So here the asylum seeker has told about a spiritual experience of reading the Bible, about some kind of an inner change. And also the person has told about the personal meaning of forgiveness of sins for this person, and how it now the person now feels certain about their salvation. And these, I would say, are all relevant and important religious experiences that are highly valued in Christianity. Of course, differently in different denominations, but nevertheless. And what does Migri say? What you have told about why you have converted to Christianity and how it has changed you is superficial and non-specific. And this is from a negative decision, obviously. So I would say that it is crucial to understand why Migri makes such a statement, because it is a major reason to why Migri denies the asylum application in this case. However, it is challenging because Migri's statement, I would say it is quite generic and it does not refer to any specific section of asylum seekers' narrative and explicitly describe what in the narrative made Migri to deem it as superficial. But my guess is that asylum seekers' emphasis on forgiveness of sins and emphasis on love of God and some kind of inner feeling, maybe they were too simplistic for the asylum official, to whom this kind of God is love talk might be a bit self-evident because of the because it is, I would say, in the Finnish culture quite a general statement, does not raise any eyebrows. However, they might have a different meaning for the asylum seeker. So, to summarize, proof of both the content and the act of faith are required by Migri. What is especially important are the narratives of profound thoughts and emotions concerning the reasons for conversion and the new religious identity, the act of faith. Then I will go to my second theological theme, which is the concept of church. And church, of course, is a very big theological theme, and there would be a lot to say about it. But now I'm just saying one little aspect of it, which is the belief of church as the family of God. And to this is connected the belief that God does not save human beings primarily as individuals, but as members of the church. So it is of crucial importance for Christians to be part of the church community. And the church as a community has a constitutive role for Christianity. And here I take again one example of a reference to the concept of church in the asylum decision. And it reads as follows. The central matters whereby you validate the authenticity of your conversion are connected to the friends you have made, as well as the feelings of peace and security. Your interest in Christianity can be considered to be connected with your perception of the different security situation of Christian and Muslim countries, and your need for a sense of community. A profound reflection considering the conversion, its reasons, or generally about religion does not come through of your narrative. Taking into consideration all the things mentioned before, Migri does not accept as a fact that you would have converted to Christianity on conscience grounds. So here, the asylum seeker has, according to Migri, justified the authenticity of the conversion through references to the community, making friends, to certain emotions of peace and security, as well as societal differences, the reference to security situation. But Migri does not see these aspects as authentic and accepts instead a so-called profound reflection on religion in general and conversion in particular. As seen, Migri explicitly uses the word authenticity here, which confirms that it is indeed the object of the assessment. And I must say that in this case of this asylum seeker, there were also other reasons that caused Migri to doubt the authenticity of the conversion, and such were that the baptism occurred only after receiving one negative decision and being suspected also of committing a crime. But now I don't have time to analyze these aspects. But the bottom line is that religious actions such as church membership and participation represent only a minimum level of interest in the new religion for Migri. They are required, and it is weakening the credibility if they are not there, but even if they are not enough. So lastly, I will go to my concluding theological and ethical questions or considerations. Firstly, concerning the concept of faith. And I would say that at least the following questions arise. What kind of knowledge of the content of faith is acknowledged, and who decides what is relevant knowledge? Authenticity of the act of faith seems to be very important for Migri, but for me, as a theologian, the fundamental question is it possible to assess the authenticity of another person's act of faith, especially in an interview, but also in general? And secondly, concerning the concept of church, following question arises. Because it seems that Migri does not see membership in a church and religious activity as internal parts of the concepts of religion. What does Migri miss when it ignores this aspect? And I would say that it misses the width and the depth of the very concept of religion, and that religious actions actually can be a constitutive part of religious identity for an individual, but also for a whole religion like Christianity, where it is very important. Yeah, okay, I could go on and wonder why maybe it is not also always so visible in the churches, even though it is, the concept of church is important theologically, practically, maybe not in all Protestant churches. It has always been like this, but nevertheless. And the most crucial question that has risen when I have done this research is, has the question of authenticity overrun the question of risk of persecution? And with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilona. You left us there with, I think, one of the cruxes of all your presentations. So thank you very much. So the last speaker in this panel, I'm very happy to welcome Zara, and we are very grateful that Zara could make it despite the time difference. Zara is a doctoral student in comparative studies and folklore at Ohio State University, USA. Having earned her first PhD in law from Tabiat Modares University in Iran, apologies for the pronunciation, and having a background in folk studies, Zara is interested in exploring the intersections between law and religion by using the ethnographic method. Zara, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hello from the US, and I'm glad to speak on my title, Fragmented Truth in Narratives of Converted Iranians in a Diaspora. In this presentation, I draw attention to the importance of a non-binary approach in the context of conversion claims to show whether it is possible to evaluate the genuineness of a claim without considering structural factors that shape the phenomenon of conversion. Relying on close interviews with a few Iranian men in the UK, I use my anthropological approach to this question to show that there are intersected truths behind and around conversion narratives of some Iranians. As part of research ethicality and to respect my interviewees' privacy, I keep their names confidential and replace them with pseudonyms. I conducted my interviews in the Persian language, of course, my mother tongue, and translated them into English. My first title is Subjective or Objective Assessment and its Consequences. Judgments of the sincerity of inner beliefs wouldn't and cannot be implemented objectively. In his Is Truth in the Eye of the Beholder, Objective Credibility Assessment in Refugee Status Determination, Michael Kagan talks of a standard analytical framework for credibility assessment and approaching the assessment with substantial caution that can help the legal system to be sure that refugee protection is satisfied and abuse of the system is prevented. According to his research, governments and courts have moved to make credibility assessment less subjective and give credibility findings a more concrete basis. Nonetheless, side effects of these substantial cautions should be considered. Refugees and asylum seekers are already spoiled and stigmatized identities in Western countries. In his Stigma Notes on the Management of Spoiled Identity, sociologist Irving Goffman defines stigma as an attribute that is deeply discrediting. He asserts that stigmatized individuals are marginalized from the dominant culture in society because of the attributes of their identities. After the increase of critics towards such apparently but overgeneralized mass conversion across Europe in 2015, European politics of skepticism started to become stronger than before, as in her Between Secrecy and Transparency conversions to Protestantism among Iranian refugees in Germany, Susanne Stadbar demonstrates. Insecurities in the Middle East, such as the Syrian war and economic crisis, had propelled a flood of immigrants and refugees to Europe. Europe was not ready to accept a lot of homeless immigrants struggling with economic crisis and ongoing conflicts. Refugees became hyper-visible to the host culture, and some public doubts on the genuineness of asylum seekers' claims began to take root. The stigma on the identities of converted refugees will not disappear even after receiving the refugee status and the credit of the conclusion that the claim is genuine. The cynicism that causes hypervisibility of Middle Eastern identities affects how other types of immigrants who live in the Europe are seen by the dominant culture. The consequences of public distrust and legal doubt result in emerging or amplifying a binary of prestigious and non-prestigious statuses. For example, Sima, a volunteer translator of refugees, encountered a white British man in a ceremony near Christmas 2019 who addressed her as a bloodsucker only when he heard she was an Iranian. She said, he continued, "You changed your religion to come here?" I responded, "I am an international student." And suddenly his speaking style and tone changed. He continued the conversation in a respectful way. However, as one of my interviewees mentioned, the Public Society of England has an empathized behavior toward refugees, but there are some racists in each society who dislike refugees. Trying to assess conversion claims objectively is doomed to fail because there are no decisive quantitative metrics that assessment of these cases could be made identically based on them. As an example, this is very likely that the assessment will be affected by the prevailing circumstances, such as political atmosphere and economic conditions, various backgrounds of the assessors, as Dr. Rose mentioned, or even characteristics of claimants. In an interview with Dee, he notes that this is possible that a judge that is now known as secular has the inclination, perhaps unconsciously, to accept the case of a converted to Christianity because of her love to her Christian ancestors. Also, conversion is not necessarily an event that occurs at a specific moment. It has reflectional points before and after the assessment time, which require considering subjective assessment, which I discuss under the second title. Gradual process of conversion and fragmented truth, two case studies. Specifically in their article, What Kind of Christianity? Lina Rose, who is here, and Deborah Tupa assert that scholars of Christianity as well as expert reports on conversion suggest that religious conversion is a gradual process that may begin long before one even enters a church and continue long after baptism. The gradual process of changing core beliefs is like a path that needs to be walked with a refugee, and their conversion needs to be examined equitably and perhaps somewhat objectively. The importance of a gradual process in conversion should be considered not only before entering the church, but also after finishing the assessment by immigration officials. This is not just because the stigma doesn't disappear after receiving the refugee status, but also because the conversion is sometimes consolidated or developed in a new form after the court/immigration centers assessments are finished. This happened in the case of Ihsan, my interviewee. He started going to a Protestant church in 2014. I summarize his narrative here for the sake of time and space. He said, I was not a religious person and didn't have the intention to become a Christian. Someone told me, come to a church. I entered the church and started learning the religion and how to practice it. They told me, because your language is good, be a translator. My friend and I became other refugees translator at the church. After a while, I saw it is not a bad place. Since then, I became one of the primary members of the church. Everyone was baptized, everyone was practicing, has been baptized except me. It was 2 years that I was active in the church. People around me were all saying, why don't you go for baptism? I told them, I have no rush. I wanted to be sure that I want to be a Christian or no. Meanwhile, I dated a woman and felt in love with her. I could apply for a status based on my marriage with her, but I did not. She was a Catholic. I suggested my wife come with me to the Protestant church. My wife was not comfortable coming with me to a Protestant church. She went to her church every Sunday and practiced her belief continuously. I sometimes went with her to the Catholic church. They liked me. After 2 years, I decided to seek asylum based on my new practices and my connection with the church. I had pictures, letters, and documents to show them. They put my case on hold. 1 year passed, and there was no news from the Home Office. I emailed Parliament and gave them my reference number. After a while, the Home Office scheduled me for an interview. My interview took 4 hours. 2 months later, they informed me they accepted my case. I still go to the church, but not to the Protestant one, but to the Catholic church. Catholic to me is more spiritual. Here, Ehsan explained the differences between these two branches of Christianity practices, mentioning close details for me about an hour. He also proudly explained that he was baptized following in the Catholic style this time. When my interview was about to finish, Ehsan told me, good luck with your research. I will go to the church the day after tomorrow and I pray for you there. In the beginning, he mentioned that he neither was a religious person nor wanted to be. Even after spending reasonable time in the Protestant church, he was not sure if he wanted to be known as a Christian or not. Finally, he applied for his status when he knew that he has enough and real documents to be recognized as a Christian. His connection with the Protestant is part of the gradual process that Dr. Rose and Deba mentioned. I could see his genuine connection with Christianity as a religion when he told me that he started to go to the Catholic Church and practice its rites. His narrative's coda reflected his belief in practice by saying, I pray for you. Indeed, he showed me that he genuinely believes in this new religion. Of course, the Home Office officials cannot predict or determine when the conversion moment happens precisely, and no one can claim that he was not a Christian when he applied for his status. These are fragmented truths of his conversion narrative that require to be placed next to each other like the pieces of a puzzle to comprehend his religious conversion and its genuineness as a phenomenon and possibly as a communicative event in the language of anthropologists. Now, let's look at Karim's narrative and why he left Iran and how he started to engage in a new religion. Experiencing many arrests by the police authorities of his home country led Karim to find a connection between his difficulties of living in Iran and the imposed and constructed religious regulations. Long before he left the country, he had started to study English and discovered the world through virtual mediums. However, he found these resources didn't allow him to know enough about other cultures. He wanted to see and experience the other world beyond limited borders. Thus, he started a journey to Europe. The path he chose was a dangerous one, as he describes, if I come back, I never try it again. After living with a suspended status for a while, he felt he was ready to change his religion. He says, I believe because of those difficulties and pressures of living in Iran, I had a lot of potentials to change my religion. He calls the reason behind the change a destiny. God wanted this to happen. The church became my community. In a foreign country, you need a religion to rely on. His process of asylum seeking took 8 years, and he saw this as due to his bad luck. He said, "This prolongation could not have happened. It depends on your luck. These cases are really based on chance." Similar to Karim, Ehsan experienced structured pressures when he was in Iran. He believed if he had stayed there, now he would become drug addicted or a prisoner like many of his friends that lived in the same neighborhood with him in Iran. He also connects some of the factors, such as meeting the Catholic woman who led him to his final religion with high power. Another similarity was the hardship of explaining supernatural elements to others except to those who were on the same page. The process of alienation from the former religious identity had started when they were living in Iran through self-understanding that the power structure of the regime and its consequences on their life is connected with ideologies of a religion that they weren't born with. This made them ready for a change. The change in their life could not happen when they had not yet departed the country, since they had not approached an alternative religion. The decisive moment of change occurred when they were in a diaspora. They connect the conversion and consequently getting the refugee status to the supernatural elements of destiny and chance. Therefore, needing a community compatible with their beliefs to rely on and connect with, their readiness and believing in fate and God's will resulted in the conversion. To understand the truth in their conversion narrative, we need to analyze the ideas of how they familiarized themselves with the new religion and its community and the concept of destiny as they name it. All of these subjectivity-based episodes constitute the narrative as a collective text. My 3 subtitle is Relationality and Power Relations in Conversion Cases. The power relations of the 2 home and host countries interlace pressures on the lives of such refugees, both in the context of alienation from previous religion and in the context of connection to the new religion. In Iran, power structures dominate the religious policies as a way to unite all groups and nationalize them as an Islamic republic. They push out religious rules breakers and make the explorers of other cultures, including religion, discouraged by threatening them with execution. In Europe, power over non-European forms through the focus on assessing the genuineness of the conversion claims through a legal system. This dual power relational system requires researchers and activists to consider relational thinking and lawmakers to consider subjective assessment. As Patricia Hills Collins and Sirma Belge believe, relational thinking rejects either / or binary thinking, for example, opposing theory to practice, scholarship to activism, or blacks to whites. Instead, relationality embraces a both / and frame. Thus, we might think of abandoning the debate of genuine and insincere claims and change our attitude to an intersectional / relational approach, at least in the context of research. As the power, religion, and social contexts are intertwined, interrelationality generates the capacity to identify the complexities among these concepts. Interviewed Iranian asylum seekers experience various structural inequalities that made them leave their home country and apply for a new religion. The new religion is not only the religious beliefs that are changed inside these individuals, rather every system of belief or ideologies that are intertwined within the religion, specifically political ideas, affects how these asylum seekers interact with the host culture. Another aspect of power relations and the relation of religious asylum is the impact on the economic system. There are variations in the time that determines when an asylum seeker or a refugee is permitted to seek out employment in the various countries of Europe. Consider that, as Sima or another religious refugees in Germany told me, if the asylum seekers are being purposefully used or directed to the black market or underground economy in some ways through accepting their claims without prolonging their proceedings, they have been exploited by the power relations in the economic structures. Therefore, the economic power structures are crisscrossed with the politics of the immigration system. When a European country needs cheap workers, it doesn't focus on the genuineness of the claim in the legal context and implicitly accept the asylum seekers as laborers. When it does not need an easily exploitable workforce, it tries to impede the process of asylum seeking and exclude them through overdoubting the asylum seekers' claims. In countries where asylum seekers are not given a work permit before receiving refugee status, they need to work in the black market to satisfy their physical needs. In this way, the asylum seekers are at risk of exploitation by the interrelated powers of economic, political, and legal relations. The last point I want to draw attention is the relationship between chance and objective assessment. The legal system wrestles with the dilemma of objective evaluation of inner beliefs and subjective judgment of claimed beliefs. In the intermediate, it feels like a roll of the dice on whether or not the asylum seeker's status will be approved or revoked. The two interviewees I spoke with for the research, as well as many others that I have the personal communication with, have mentioned that chance plays an influential role in the evaluation of their cases being accepted or rejected. One related aspect of the issue is examining how the preset numbers that each country applies itself in accepting refugees affects the legal assessment of these cases. For instance, if the UK takes in less than 0.5% of their wards refugees, isn't it reasonable for these people to feel that the legal system is a gamble? As a researcher focusing on interdisciplinary studies, I observed that there might be relations between what the interviewees call chance/luck, beside the supernatural elements, and the predetermined figures that should be considered. For the conclusion, this paper's purpose was to show how a new lens such as non-binary could help understanding complexities around the issue of credibility assessment of conversion claims among asylum seekers. It's impossible to achieve an objective truth when a complicated human experience, meaning conversion, is the case. Instead, considering fragmented truth as collective text might be one solution. Considering the facts behind the scene and regarding power relations can add more realities to the conversion stories at the macro level. Explaining the reasons such as destiny and God's will may not be easy and straightforward to the officials when their surroundings are full of cynicism and non-believability. To sum up, what I wanted to show is that how conversion claims are shaped by broader structural factors like politics and economics. And there are beyond internal beliefs/states as the sole criterion for thinking about conversion. This paper tried to show the complexity of conversion, or at least part of it, and the importance of the relational or non-binary approach. Sometimes we should think beyond authentic/inauthentic, genuine/insincere claims. Thank you so much, and excited to hear your comments and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was a lot of food for thought, those 3 presentations.